Hello and welcome to episode 111 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my live streaming career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. On this episode, I'm joined by Modernist writer David Pottinger, one of the fellas behind Move On Up, a Modernist-inspired blog, and he's the young fellow who interviewed Paul Weller for the Jam documentary about the young idea. Looking forward to this one, so let's get into it. David Pottinger, thanks for joining me.
No worries, mate. Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Lovely to have you on. Let's kick off. I want to take you back to being 6 years old. You're on holiday in Spain, and you're hearing the Jam for the first time.
It's sort of those early childhood sort of memories and things that you shouldn't remember, but you somehow do, and they're quite significant. The Jam and music of that ilk and that era were always sort of subconsciously playing throughout my life in those early days. And I remember places like Mallorca, and my dad would have a CD player, a portable CD player he'd bring with him, and he'd have like the albums just in one of those, do you remember those mad like noughties, late 90s like CD flip case things?
I remember going on a travelling trip to Hawaii, and it was meant to be out there for 3 months, and I burnt about 500 CDs in one of those things and never played them ever because the car we hired had a cassette tape. I forgot about those. Christ.
It was one of them, and it was just like, obviously being a little kid, your parents always get you ready first and stick you in front of the TV while they're getting themselves sorted for your evening meal and stuff. And there'd be like House Martin's Jam, I'm trying to think, like Beautiful South Style Council, all that sort of stuff, Human League, the decent end of the 80s stuff. It was always there, and I subconsciously knew, and I'd hum along and stuff like that. But then I think at that age, if somebody had have asked me outright, oh, do you know who the Jam are, I'd have been a bit like, yeah, if my dad had reminded me of like a tune of, for example, like That's Entertainment or Pretty Green or something like that, I'd have probably gone, oh yeah, I know who that is,
Well, look, let's fast forward to age 11 and getting an iPod for Christmas, and that's where it properly started for you, right?
Yeah. It was just one of them. Obviously, the 2000s, you had that advancement of iPods, and the iPod Nano was really cool. And I was like, these are fucking good. Like, I want one of these for Christmas. Do you know what I mean? And I got one, and my dad was like, I think prior to obviously giving me, he tested. Parents like, test it works. Like proper like 2000s. Like you need to make sure this thing works. He put Absolute Beginners on there, just off. I think it was off that best of. Do you remember that best of they did in the 2000s, where the three of them were on the front? And there was like that sort of the All Mod Cons Target, I think, was in the background, and Absolute Beginners was on there. I remember he said, I've only put one song on to test it works. I've worked out how to do it with the home PC. We can put CDs. And I was like, great. I listened. I remember it was one of them songs, because obviously it was the back end of their career, and it was one of them songs that you don't really hear if you're not into the band, you know what I mean? And the brilliant brass section at the start. And I remember listening to it thinking, Jesus Christ, this is sort of different to the other songs that I've heard from, say, 78, 79. This is like 80, 81. So it was a transitional sort of thing in my brain. I was like, shit, they're fucking good, these. There's something a bit more about these. I mean, I was listening to like Arctic Monkeys' first record at the time, or really early stuff, the Kooks, Franz Ferdinand, probably Kaiser Chiefs, those Hard-Fi, those noughties guitar bands that was quite unusual for a kid of that age to probably listen to. And then this sort of ticked another door in my opened like another door in my brain almost. I was thinking, Jesus, there's more to it than just meets the eye and the ear in this case.
Your dad's obviously clearly got good taste. Did the mod thing come with? Is he a mod? Is he into that stuff as well?
He moved to Middlesbrough from Durham in I think it was 77 when he was like 13. And obviously in the city he'd come out and he got that, and like his older brother, my uncle, was big into like the Pistols and sort of Buzzcocks and the new wavy sort of Teardrop Explodes and Stiff Little Fingers and bands like that. So there was that, like, in the house, them two would bounce off each other with music, because my grandparents were big into like classical music, and they were both classically trained with piano and flute and things like that. So they were never into the music of the time. And then it got to like, obviously with a lot of people of my dad's generation, it got to like 79. And obviously it blew up, didn't it? That was the thing, like kids in parks at school and kids digging back and going back into like the Who, the Small Faces, the Kinks, the Animals, the 60s stuff. And he sort of, jumped on then really. He was into music from like the Jam from probably about the start of the new wave, end of punk, that sort of splice. And then, got into the clothes and stuff sort of when he was about 15 in bang on about 79. Yeah.
You mentioned that time period where you're really getting into these guitar bands as a young kid as well. And at that point, Weller's obviously a solo artist, but your route into Weller was the Jam then, not the Style Council, not Weller solo. It started the Jam and then expanded out, right?
Yeah, I always knew of his solo stuff because, cars at the time, you'd have a CD player, wouldn't you? So when I was going to like football practice and stuff like that, my dad would always have like the current record in the car. So I remember like Days of Speed particularly well. And then I remember a couple of years later, like Studio 150 as well, because obviously that was all covers. And then like Illumination, even Heliocentric and stuff like that. So I remember like those records, but yeah, the Jam was like the route in. And then I became like massively obsessive, like sort of really, really quickly. I remember buying like all 5 albums myself. And then I remember from then there was a really good teacher at school, my head of year, Mr. Cass, who was called like brilliant bloke. And he did me bootlegs. So my granddad had been like really ill. I was quite down about it because I was really decently like close to him. Said pop in my office one day, and I popped in, and there was like Live at the Rainbow, Live Jam he'd done, Reading University, like 79. You know, these like mad bootlegs where they're like, you can tell they've been like lifted out by a security guard or something. But I had all them, and they worked with the iPod. So like, then you had all the records, you had like extras, like the one they released in 92, and then you had all the bootlegs as well. I mean, Weller would probably be a bit annoyed I had all the bootlegs, but as a fan, as a kid, you just got that obsession, got that into it. You're like, I need to hear like a live version of this, and you know, like Dig the New Breed and Extras only took you so far. You wanted like that raw live energy of those gigs that, you know, were generations before that you've only ever seen on like the DVDs and MTV and stuff like that.
What an education. What an amazing teacher. Look, it is the bootlegs you need to listen to. I mean, that's the type of stuff they should teach in schools, quite frankly, right? Oh,
100%. I mean, a lot of the sort of beliefs and values from Weller's music have always been instilled in me from a young age. My dad was a union man within the fire service, and I stood on picket lines as a kid. So all that obviously that's going more, obviously, in the council, isn't it? And Red Wedge and things like that. But all those sort of beliefs that I had growing up have always been instilled through that music and those bands and artists, really, and stuff I still strongly believe in now as an adult, you know. You
mentioned this obsessive nature for the music. That becomes a thing for the world of mod as well then, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I got the iPod in like 2006, and then I think it was like 2008. I was banging into skateboarding. I was big into like that late 90s, like MTV, skateboarding, Tony Hawk sort of scene with the PlayStation games and all that, because a kid growing up in Middlesbrough at that time, like it was either you were into nothing, you were a chav, like into shitty sportswear, or you were sort of into your own little thing. And there was a couple of lads who BMX and skateboard and stuff. So that was quite cool. And it was its own little movement, which was good, I suppose. And then, yeah, I remember like it was one year I had some birthday money, like 2014. So I've just turned like 14. I remember like the Cortina's first record had come out, and Liam Frey at the time was quite cool. He wore like Fred Perry and John Smedley and stuff like that. And my dad always wore that sort of stuff. So you knew sort of what it was. I remember going into TK Maxx and seeing like just the standard twin tip Fred Perrys they had in there. They were quite unusual. There was like the first one I ever bought was white with like a forest green tipping, and I was like, it's really nice that. And it was too big, being like 5'5" and quite skinny. It was too big, but you tucked it in and made it sort of work. You know, it's that DIY punk sort of ethos I always thought of, that my really early mod days. And then it snowballed from there. You got in like button down shirts, and you'd be on YouTube watching snippets of stuff that like Paolo Hewitt had done. I remember there was this documentary where he had shirts out on a washing line and was talking about 3-finger collars, you know, and doing that. I was thinking, this is interesting. And it just, as a 14-year-old kid as well, it's like, Jesus, this, I didn't realise there was this much to it. And you're still learning now. I mean, I've been into clothes and music now for what, bloody hell, 14 years probably, particularly in the clothes. It's a long time. So even now you're still picking up new bands, and you're always pushing it. Do you know what I mean? You never like, for me, it's never standing still. I wouldn't ever like when I was 15, I had Jam Gibson shoes and like Sporting Blazers and the Revival stuff. But at 27, going on 28, you can't be knocking about in that gear anymore. So you keep that ethos, that DIY punk ethos of like, making it your own, but you always move it on. Do you see what I mean? But I was very, very, obsessive from an early age. I remember a school trip to like Beamish, which is like a museum up like our way. I wore like brown Desert Trek, black jeans and the classic black and yellow Fred Perry and a black Harrington jacket. And that's quite a standard look. I'd look at that and think, decent, but standard for like 14, 15-year-old kid. And I got fucking hammered. The playground, like, was ruthless. And there was this one girl in my year who like was cool and was into like indie bands like the Rakes and stuff like that. And she was like, I was like Fred Perry. I was like, yeah. And then I instantly was like, yeah, this is the right path to like be on.
Now, we should talk about Move On Up. Yeah, you've got this obsessive nature around music and mod, the clothes and all that going on. But what inspired you to want to turn that into something that you could write about, you could share with others, and this blog? I
was turning 19 in like a month. And I remember thinking, I want to sort of contribute to the scene and get something out there, but I'm not in a band. I don't really play guitar. People had argued I potentially could sing in tune, but I wasn't, I wasn't in a position where I could be a frontman of this cool guitar band, you know what I mean? I was always quite good at writing. I got good grades at school in language and literature. I did them at A-level and did quite well at A-level as well. And I always enjoyed writing. It was always something that, I remember being a real little kid and we had an assessment at primary school and I wrote about our borough's semi-final League Cup win against Arsenal. Do you know what I mean? So I always had something in me about culture and writing about things that were observational. And I thought, I need to contribute somehow. I'm a lad from Middlesbrough. There's not really anything going on up here. There's scooter clubs, but if you don't have a scooter, you're pretty fucked, really. You can't run behind them. I remember me and my mate, Graham, like childhood best mate, before I was going away to Benicassim, a music festival with loads of pals from college. And I was like, right, I want to do this. I've got an idea. I thought Move On Up, obviously the Curtis Mayfield track, the Jam covered it. There was that link. But then Move On Up as in a phrase of progressionalism. So you're moving up all the time. So and there wasn't anything around. There was Mod Culture, which is a great site, but there wasn't really anything else around, particularly from kids. We were kids. So I just ran with it, really. And I interviewed my good mate, Ali Sheeran, who's Alistair James, and he was a solo artist, still is. Check him out. I interviewed him, and then it just sort of snowballed. And I thought, I'm contributing here. I'm doing something. I'm adding to something that I love, that I've been involved with for a couple of years. And it was never for any gain. It was never to earn money or anything ridiculous like that. It was always just to contribute and have a almost a solitary voice in a scene that was, at the time, quite men of a certain vintage, shall we say. So it was nice to be a kid and contribute to something and it be really well received quite early on and respected, because I was a bit like, it might get shunned, which it could happen, but it didn't, which was really good. Yeah. Paul
famously is called by so many publications and probably even his mates. I mean, I imagine some of the people on this podcast who've got Paul's number probably have them in his phone as the mod father.
I don't, but
sadly it's not in my phone yet, but one day, fingers crossed. I've always wondered if that's something he kind of, and I think maybe he likes it more now, but I don't know if that's always been a thing that he's loved, that title. I don't know. What's your view on that?
It's not ever something I've asked him, because I always thought it was like a bit of like a media cringe fest, really, a bit like like lazy journals at like Q or like NME. Because I was pulling some stuff out of my dad's house the other day. I had a stack of like 200 NMEs, and it was like him and Miles Kane on the front. It was like the mod couple, and that wasn't too bad. But yeah, the mod father thing, yeah, I don't know, man. I think it was more when he was a solo artist in the early 2000s. You had like, you had the Ordinary Boys, and you had, I think, what other bands like Hard-Fi and the Rifles emerging, and a lot of these bands who he's always championed young people and young up and coming bands, and he's always given them a platform, which is fantastic. Even right up until, like tours now where he's had like, he had the Spitfires, didn't he? Good mates of mine, top lads. He always gave them a pedestal to get on there, touts and bands like that. And I think that's where it comes from, personally. I think I mentioned it once years ago, and he said, Dave, there's worse things to be called. And I was like, yeah, precisely. It could be worse. It could be better, I think. And I think he just sort of takes it with a pinch of salt, really. Yeah.
But clearly an icon of the mod movement, right? He's somebody who's, is always pushing forward, and he kind of has his own interpretation of that as well. But for Weller, from your point of view, when was the first gig? When did you first see him live?
It was 2008, Middlesbrough Town Hall, but it was like an 18 plus gig, and I was like 14. So it was one of them. I sort of, my dad was like, look, I I'll get you a ticket on the realisation that it's potentially your pocket when you wasted, like, you know, you're probably not going to get in. So him and my uncle Anthony like gone in, and I sort of like just jibbed it a little bit, like managed to just get in. It was before the days of, you know, scanning and like bag checking and all the sort of precautions we have to go through now in this modern world. And it was the 22 Dreams tour, yeah. And I just sort of found my dad and just stood like right near him and managed to take the gig in, yeah, which was mega really for like a kid of that age. Because then shortly after, all gigs are like 14 plus. So it was like that like effort I'd gone to like sort of almost jibbing it and getting in had like gone to waste. But yeah. And then I think the next time was like 5 years later, like 2013 at City Hall. It was just after Sonic Kicks, yeah. So like moving on to Saturn's Pattern, yeah, that in-betweenish period, yeah. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
So your Weller band, your Weller live band is Pilgrim, Andy Crofts. Ben had joined the band at that point, I think, maybe?
Yeah. Crofty, Cordelia, Andy Lewis was on bass. Yeah, so it was that era, and they were always tight, they were always really good. And it was always a show. You notice how they'd take certain songs and, you know, slow them down for his voice, and That's Entertainment was all, because I remember the first time I saw it, I was it might be like the Jam, but as a 14-year-old kid, you come to realise, oh yeah, it's different now, it's changed. Voices, tones, you know, the era changes, so it has to move with the times. And yeah, they were always brilliant. It was always a really good show, particularly around that time. You always came out thinking, fucking hell, that was good, you know.
Absolutely. Now, we should talk about the summer of 2015, because this is nuts, right? I mean, proper life-changing opportunities. Take me through how this all first started this year, because this is crazy.
Things started to get very heavy, as the Scouts would say, in a good term. Very, very heavy. Yeah, it was mad. It was a mad one, really. Obviously, the site had been going like a couple of years. I'd sort of got some connections in London, and I was always down in London as a kid anyway. I'd get a train from like our local station at the time was like Darlington, so you could get a return for like 25 quid. So you go down and buy some clothes or some records or whatever. It was always like a world of wonder, like a 15-year-old kid going into the capital. I'd got some connections down there. More just made some friends. So I'd met Bax. I've known Bax now best part of 10 years, and I'd met Stu DeBill. They were putting on at the Cockpit, obviously a place we both know very well, an event called, I think it was a London Modernist literary event. And Stuart basically rang me and said, look, Dave, I want you to come down and do some interviewing. You've done it on your site. I know you as a lad, obviously, from really early Spitfires gigs like the year before in Middlesbrough. And he knew I could talk, and he knew I could chat to people and was a personal sort of person. So he said, look, come down and do it, and you can interview Bax. And obviously I knew Bax, so it was like comfortable, you know, people I knew I was comfortable with. And I was absolutely shitting it. I remember going down on the train. We'd been in a nightclub like until about 3 o'clock that morning, and the train was 7 o'clock. And we got on this train, and the air conditioning was broken. It was the middle of February, fucking freezing and hungover. And I was like thinking, this isn't gonna go well. I haven't prepared well at all. And got down, and it went really, really well. Everybody who came up to me that day, and it was hundreds of people who I didn't know, just me and Graham had gone down from the northeast. They were like, oh, you did really well. And like, it was one of our highlights of the day, you and Bax, because it was like two fellas from different eras who were bouncing off each other really well, and we had a real laugh. It was just a natural, and Bax was like, fucking hell, Dave, we did well there. That was good, mate, because it was the first event of its kind at the time. They hadn't really happened in that capacity. And then Nikki Weller was on last. She was the last person to come on and did a really good interview. I remember before her interview, I was in the crowd on the seats once I'd done mine. She showed me a picture on her phone that she'd taken of me on the stage. I said, oh, that's cool. I said, and I'd recognised her sort of. And I said, oh, are you Paul's sister by any chance? She went, oh, yeah, nice to meet you. Little handshake and stuff. And she said, oh, yeah, I've just sent that to Paul. And I was thinking, fucking hell, hang on a minute. It's a bit like, and she showed me the text message. It was something like, this young lad, he looks like you did when you were a kid, because obviously Paul had darker hair then, similar to me, a similar look and style that I was portraying at that time. And he put, oh God, yeah, that's cool, man. Something like rock on the kids or something, you know, like always championing youth like he always has done. And I remember thinking, fucking hell, this is mad, this. And then like, just even just to be sort of, him to knew I exist was enough for me. I think I'd sort of done what I always hoped and dreamed as a child would, you know, happen. And then it was about a month later, and he was playing in York, and I was at uni in York. He was playing the Barbican, and me and my mate Stu had gone down. Nikki had I'd been chatting to Nikki and stuff, and she'd sorted me out with like backstage and stuff. And I was thinking, fucking hell, this is a bit mad, really. I sort of preempted myself thinking, right, things like this, you know, music's like, I'd been in and around bands for years. So I was like, stuff can change, stuff can alter, it might not happen. So I remember like getting the wristbands and putting some cash in the charity box and stuff as you do. Me and Stu was sort of, I was only young. I was like 20 going on 21. I was like, look, this might not happen. I was like, yeah, it potentially won't. And then I remember at the end of the gig, we got taken at the side and pushed through. And at the Barbican, like the dressing rooms are down like a long winding corridor. There was like loads of people. I don't know how there was loads of people. I don't know if there's like a competition or something. There's loads of people. I was thinking, she's mad. And then like Mark came out, who I've got to know over the years, and like head of security, great fella, proper class fella. And he was like, you two Nickies? And I was like, oh yeah, come through. And it was like everybody else was like sort of stood there. This is a bit bad. And then like you go into this like narrow corridor, the dressing room just off it, and then it just wanders out. He's like, oh, now fellas, all right, how are we doing? You must be Dave. And I was like, this is a bit mad, this, isn't it? And Stu like was a like yourself, you know, like a lifelong fan, an older fella, and Stu was like thinking, Jesus, like I've been following him all this years, and it's young David Pottinger who's like got me in here, and we were chatting in it, and it was class. It was just lovely. It was like, obviously you were nervous. You were really like thinking, God, I'm meeting someone who my dad's always looked up to, and my uncle, and all fellas I've known of that age, you know. And I was thinking, geez, this is mad. And we chatted about clothes and music, and I had some like wool trousers on. So instantly he was like, oh, fuck, they're nice, man. Where'd you get them? And I was, you know, talking to him about them. I had like a Saturday job in Topman at the time in like suiting, so I could get half decent trousers for like, you know, like decent price and stuff. And it was just mad. And it was all, we got a picture, and it was all over in a sort of whirlwind. And then I met like, and then Craddock and Andy Lewis and Crofty and all that were out in the bit where all the people were chatting to people there. So I like got chatting to them, and like Craddock was particularly charming, like he always is. And it was lovely to, you know, meet him for the first time and chat and stuff. And then we just we went, but it was just brilliant. And then that was like March. And then a couple of months later, I got it was either a call or a text off Nikki, and she said, might have some work for you. And I was thinking, all right, okay, interesting. She said, we're doing a documentary about the band, and we need some youth there. And Paul's requested some youth, and he sort of said, he met you, he was really impressed by meeting you, he thought you're a really nice young lad, he wants you involved. I was thinking, Jesus Christ, hang on a minute. Like, things are snowballing quite quick from a little website me and my mate have created in my childhood bedroom at my dad's house to now potentially being on something quite big here. And it was with Sky as well, with Bob Smeaton, the director, brilliant bloke, Geordie as well, so there's that Northeast connection there. And I remember I then had a Zoom interview, similar like this with you, with Bob, and I think it was sort of to suss out whether I could talk on camera, because you can't, with these things, as you know, Dan, it's like you can't count on paying for somebody to come down to London, getting them in front of a camera, and fucking hell, this shit. What are you doing now? It's a day wasted.
That's why I do radio, my friend.
It's a day wasted. So I remember we did like an interview like that, like this. And I think it was to suss out whether I was like a proper fan and stuff, and I actually knew about the band. But obviously I can spiel about it all day long, like not a problem. So that went really well. And then him and his producer Martin got in touch and said, right, we need you down in London. I'd finished uni that summer. They'd like said, right, you need to get this train. I remember getting the train. I had to like change at Northallerton. The train, like something had happened, and I didn't get on that train. I was thinking, fuck. And I rang, like, this is like 7 o'clock in the morning, like 20-year-old kid thinking, oh shit, I've like proper messed up here.
I've blown it.
Yeah, like, I'm done here. I rang Martin. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. Your ticket, you can get on any. So I got on the next one like 20 minutes later. I remember having like my mum, God bless her, had made me like sandwiches for the journey to go down. And like I'm sat there, I can't eat these, because prior to this happening, like maybe a week, Martin had rang me and said, look, yeah, you need to come down. We'll get you a taxi. We're at St. John's Wood at Rack Studios, where All Mod Cons was recording. Obviously, being a little historian as well with the band, I knew about Vic Coppersmith having producing the record there and things like that. And then he accidentally on that phone call went, oh yeah, you'll do your bit, and then you'll do your bit with Paul. And I went, Paul? He went, oh fuck, you heard him down the phone. he was like, right, keep it right, pretend you don't know, but yeah, Weller's coming down, you're doing an interview with him. And I was going, whoa, hang on. This has got, this has gone from like just chatting like me and you are doing now, talking about the band and the origins of me getting into it and all this, to now interviewing as a 20-year-old lad from Middlesbrough with no media, barring an A-level qualification at all or experience, to interviewing the greatest British songwriter ever. You know, so that's why the nerves on the train down, I couldn't eat any of the sandwiches, like, had to bin them, like, finish, like, chicken mayo sandwiches, always really good. They were in the bin. And I remember just, like, going down into the studio and Nicky had brought Paul and the twins were there. So, like, obviously I'd met the twins before at backstage a few months earlier. So I was doing teaching at uni. So it was like, I knew how to talk to kids. I had a little crack at the kids. And he was like, how you doing, man? Are you all right? Should we get a cuppa? I was like, yeah. Cuppa. And it was almost, because I'd met him before, it was like, oh, it was okay. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't like as nervous. And Paul's like one of those people who, like, if you know him quite well, it's like just meeting an old pal. So it's like chatting to a mate. So it's not like you're not worried, you're not panicking like you would be with, you know, you see some of these like rock stars like LG and people like that and Ashcroft. You can imagine them being a bit, oh, hang on, like you don't know what's going to happen, but it's just dead chilled. And then I remember doing it. We obviously sat in front of the mixing desk, and I've still got that as like my Facebook like cover photo. It's like, nothing's going to beat that, is it? Young mod kid with interviewing Weller at 20, and sat in front of the mixing desk. And I remember, I think we did it in 2 takes as well. But the questions were what Sky gave me. And I remember the first one, and it was like, how did the band get their name? And I was thinking, no, I wouldn't have asked that. I remember telling him after, like, I didn't ask them questions. He went, showbiz, mate, I know it was them. It was like, all cool, like, you know, like brothers in arms type thing, like, not a problem. And it went really well. And then a couple of months later, it got aired, and it was at the Ham Yard Hotel near Piccadilly Circus. And I remember I met Bax and Snowy on Carnaby Street, and we had a quick pint in the Shakespeare's Head. And then we wandered around a bar Italia, and there was me, Bax, Snowy, Eddie Pillar, Martin Freeman was there as well. So it was just like mod euphoria as a kid, you know, all these cool people. And we had like a coffee there, and then we wandered around to where else, because I'd gone down and I didn't know where this hotel was. It was where the Ham Yard Club was. It was all like built on the site. I didn't have a clue it was in that area. And I remember us just going, and it was a big do. It was a really nice hotel, and then like free drinks and all the rest of it, all that jazz. And I paced myself. I was like, yeah, I'm going to be steady. I'm not going to be like on a student night out here. I'm going to be steady away, a nice cappuccino in between. And I remember like going in, it was like a full cinema. It was lovely, like a full cinema screen. I was sat with, there was me, there was Eddie Pillar and Martin Freeman. I remember, and they gave you like a gift bag, right? And it was like, you know, when the gift came out and you got the candy stripe bag with the record in, it was that. And you got like the About the Young Idea CD they'd done, and like a few other bits. So that was cool anyway, do you know what I mean? And then I remember like I'd had a few beers and I really needed the toilet. I was like, but my bit hadn't come on yet. So I remember like running to the toilet, going for a wee, coming back, and then Martin Freeman like tapped me on the shoulder. Dave, your bit hasn't come on yet, man. I was like, so like all this mad stuff was going on, and I remember watching it, and like Mickey Flanagan was there, which was just mad. And like I remember,
what's the connection? I need to write this down and get him on the podcast.
I think Dan, he was a big Jam fan, because at the exhibition at Somerset House, the first big exhibition, you know the guy who was on the Inbetweeners and was Simon's dad.
I know you mean, yeah.
He was actually, you know, when Eaton Rifles was on top of the pops, and he had a couple of kids dressed as soldiers or something like that. He was one of them, so there was connections there. But I think Mickey Flanagan was just a massive fan, so he was there. And I said something to him, I can't remember what I said. I remember like going, "Oh, now Mickey, all right." I said, "Comedy's a bit naff, isn't it?" And he went, "You're a cheeky fucker, ain't you?" You know, just stuff like that. Just mad, like 20 years old in the capital, like all this stuff going on. But yeah, it was an unbelievable experience. And then a couple of months later, the DVD came out, and Bob had really kindly put any stuff we hadn't put on the DVD on the bonus disc. So there's loads more stuff on there of me just chatting to Paul Weller about the Jam and various things. It was unbelievable. I've never ever reached those heady heights ever again. Do you know what I mean? I don't think it gets better than that, really. It was just phenomenal. I was always really grateful for all those really nice people who thought of me and put me in that position, really. I was very privileged. It's probably, barring maybe getting my degree and stuff and and things like that. It's probably the greatest thing I've ever done, I think, and still humbled by it now, you know.
Well, what an amazing experience for a young lad and, well, for anybody. And obviously, you know the purpose of this podcast, right? The aim of this podcast is to get that interview with Mr. Weller. And I kind of think we're building up to an impossible task here. So, but also, I know the day after I've done it, assuming this happens, right? Obviously, but
I'm sure.
But assuming that happens, and the day after, I'm going to be crushed. It's like, well, where do I go from there? You know?
That's the thing for me. I always had in my head as a kid, like, who would I like to interview? And he was obviously always number one. And I've interviewed some brilliant people since then, like yourself, Mick Talbot, Eddie Pillar, people like that over the years, Andy Lewis, some really cool people. It just sort of, it's like, where do you go from here, really? It's like the pinnacle, isn't it? I think there is obviously a few more people in the thing, but it's just to get interviews with those people as well. Like you say, it's for me, it's like you do, like I do with the site. It's putting work in. It's putting effort in, and it's producing something with my writing, with your podcast that people are going to enjoy and gain something from. Whereas there's a lot now, particularly in this really, really modern world. This is the modern world, pardon the pun, that we're living in. There's a lot now where people think they can just hash away on social media, and you see it all the time, daily hashing away on social media, and that's going to get them somewhere. And for me personally, our website has always been about quality, not quantity. Putting something out there that people are going to gain something from. It's going to leave them feeling, refreshed or more insightful. Like again, with the podcast of yours, I've listened to, I've always got something from it. I've enjoyed it and I've got something from it. And I think there needs to be more of that going on, to be more of a craft, as opposed to people just going, I'll post every day on social media and that might get me somewhere or earn me some money. We've never been about that. It's always been about putting something out there that people are going to gain something from,
Yeah, no, I really like that ethos, because I think you're right. Yeah. It's about kind of, you want to inspire people, right? Yeah. And then they'll come back to your website and read more. And that's the same, the podcast is, I want people to take, and this will live forever. The same with the website, right? That content's there forever. Anybody can consume it. And that's a really cool thing. Obviously, the exhibition, you mentioned Somerset House, and as really special things, but just off the back of the latest exhibition in Brighton, another, entirely new thing. I'm trying to persuade Nicky Weller to do one for Paul Weller solo. These are really special events. Great seeing all this memorabilia, all this stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've done the Brighton one. I did the Somerset House one. I was very lucky to be invited to the night before it opened, and same for the Liverpool one as well. And I think I love them both, but I think the Somerset House one was my favourite one because it was the first of its kind, and because the sort of scale of it, what Somerset House is like. It's a lovely place, and it was like a ticketed do. Sally Craddock was on like the gate and stuff like that, little things like that. Obviously, Martin Freeman turned up, and I remember us all being so then he turned a few heads because he looked absolutely immaculate like he normally does. Obviously, Weller was at that one as well. So it was a real big occasion, and it was a really nice summery night in London as well. And I remember me and Billy from the Spitfires just like drinking beer and then just like eating loads of canapes and gosh, should we have a cocktail? Yeah, fuck it, God. But then the whole thing was just lovely because it was almost like a celebration of the band and the people who the band has touched as well. And that's what I really liked about it. And I was lucky to go down a couple of times that summer, and it was just fantastic just seeing, like you say, the cool little doodles in the school books and stuff. And I remember my books at school were always adorned, when you used to back your books with like the Who, the Small Faces, the Jam, Style Council, all, your obvious bands in there. And I remember just seeing that and thinking, we're not so that different after all. Everyone's come from somewhere. So it was really nice. But I think what Nicky and the Nice Time Productions team have done, and Den and everybody who've done with them, is fantastic. It's a real achievement, and it's touched people across not only the country but the world. So big up to them, really.
Well, it's an amazing amount of work that's gone into those things as well. Yeah, incredible. Hey, look, this has been so lovely, man. As you know on the podcast, we have 2 questions to wrap things up. You're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. What are you going to go with?
Jesus Christ, that's one, isn't it? The thing is with this, Dan, as well, it does change. Like other bands, you'll have a song that, like, fair enough, that's my favourite song by them, whatever. But with like the Jam and stuff, because of the sort of the special nature of it, and them being entwined in my being from a very young age, and every fibre of my body. Oh God, Jam song. I think, you know what? I think I'd go with something like "Fly" off All Modcons, because it's probably the greatest love song ever written. So yeah, I think I'd go with something like that, because it's one of them songs that sometimes, depending on, maybe you've had a few beers and you've gone back and put your headphones in, put your AirPods in, and brings a little tear to your eye, man. So yeah, I'd probably go with Fly, I think, yeah. But that could potentially change,
The thing I always think as well is like, what's the one that if you finish this chat, what's the one that you'll walk over to the stereo or you'll shout to your smart speaker or whatever and you put on? And that's quite a good way of thinking about it, because you're right, it will change tomorrow. It will be a different song. It will be a different moment. But at that moment in time, it's that one. That's a great suggestion. We've not had that one on the podcast before. In fact, I don't know that we've had anything off that album. I'm trying to think.
Really? That was the pinnacle for me, and is the pivotal songwriting moment that turned a band into the fucking biggest band in the country almost overnight, wasn't it? And Polydor were like, hang on a minute, we're not going to be harsh with them now. We're going to be all right with them,
Yeah. We'll keep them on. We'll keep them on the label.
Keep them on.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, and the final question. So the purpose of this podcast is to talk to amazing people like yourself who have these connections, these memories, this love of Weller, and we weave these stories through the podcast series. But as you'll know, I gave up my radio career 10 years ago with one big regret, which was never getting to interview Mr. Weller. Fingers crossed it'll happen. But that's the only reason, really, I'll be honest, it's the only reason this podcast exists. It's lovely chatting to people like yourself, but the purpose is to get the chat with Weller, all right? Let's be honest.
Yeah, you're all right. You're all right.
yeah, this has been fun, but, when's Paul coming on? So when it happens, if it happens, what should I ask Paul?
You could ask him how cool I am. No, I'm joking.
If you hadn't have asked all of Sky's questions that they're giving you, what would your questions have been? What would you have taken in?
The thing is, that was about the jam. So I had to sort of 76 to 82. I couldn't really maneuver. But I think if I had to ask again, I'm very intrigued about, and I don't think there's a lot about this. I would ask Dan something along the lines of, when obviously Modernism, a New Decade, is it 89? And it was dropped, wasn't it, by Polydor? It was dropped. And then that record's only surfaced years later. And then there was the whole thing of like 90, 91, 92 and the Paul Weller movement with Max Beasley on keys and this sort of acid jazz thing coming, then the build up to the first record. And I read somewhere once that I think it was like 90, 91, someone went, if that first record hadn't come out and the movement tour hadn't done as well as it did, because my dad saw him in the town hall at Middlesbrough like 91, and that holds like 2,000 people, and there was maybe 400 or 500 people there, and people were like, well, we're lucky to be here, but this is mad, this fucking Weller, like, what's going on? I would ask him something like, did you think at that period of time that you would have this unbelievable 30, 40 year solo career when you didn't have a label? Because I'm really interested on that, and I don't think it's ever really been touched on in the books, the documentaries. I think that would be my question, man. Yeah. That's
a great question. It's really interesting. You're absolutely right, because there's that, and that whole kind of self-doubt that comes from that. And you hear that through some of the songs around that time when, has my fire really gone out? All that kind of stuff, which must be related to that. But that must have been you'd have thought a desperate period for somebody who loves creating music and wants to get it out into the world, but who knows?
It would be really scary. I mean, doing something from 14, 15, always having success, and then all of a sudden, hang on, the labels fucked off the last record. The band's sort of done. We've gone out on a high, being one of the biggest pop groups. I mean, I read somewhere that one of the final gigs, like, because people were hearing that new acid house sort of like thing, they were like ripping up programs and stuff, and I was like, what the hell, like, this has gone a bit like, it's gone a bit punk, hasn't it? Like, this is a bit weird.
It's some kind of thing around that final Style Council gigs. Is that a myth where they I think that's, can you imagine having such an extreme reaction to any musical performance that you would rip up the program and like be angry?
I never buy a program anyway, but I just can't. I just read somewhere recently, and someone was like, "Oh yeah, there was ripping up programs," and this hazy thing of like, "Oh, were they? Weren't they?" And then some guy actually had a program or something, but apparently ripping up programs and chucking them from the balcony.
But that furious that the Style Council have not played the music from their greatest hits that you know and love, and he's played this house stuff. I'm going to rip it up and storm off. Brilliant,
mental. But like, for me, unbelievable. But that's testament to the level of creativity and the determined guy he is, that the perfectionist in him, he will never give up, and that's why in 2022 he's still as relevant as he ever has been. He's not like one of these washed up artists who's touring, well, let's tour the greatest hits again, shall we? Let's put some more money, in the hit parade. It's like he's still relevant. He's still creating brilliant records. Fat Pop last year was a fucking triumph. Do you know what I mean? It was a record that makes you think, Jesus Christ, there's still something there, and there always will be. And that's what's, for me, the legacy that he'll always have. He's always relevant forever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, no, I 100% echo that. David, this has been such a joy to have you on the podcast, man. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
I really appreciate you asking me. Cheers, Dan. Thank you very much.
My thanks once again to David Pottinger, another fabulous guest on the podcast. Do check out the show notes for this episode on my website, paulwellerfanpodcast.com. And whilst you're there, do check out my store for exclusive podcast merchandise, and you can show your support for the pod by buying a virtual coffee as well. Doing that this week. First up, Johnny Lancaster. Thumbs up, a big fan of the show. Cheers, pal. Thanks for all your support. Jem Milner, hi to you. Alex McLaughlin, cheers as always, friend. Martin Glover, greetings from the other side of the world. Great podcast. Can't wait for the big one and for the next time the great man visits our shores. Perhaps you could ask him that. Simon Cartilage, cheers for your support. Mark Iskowitz, he says, Dan, your podcast is always a highlight of my week's entertainment. Congratulations on engaging in terrific discussions with interesting people who share your wealth of Weller enthusiasm. No doubt that Paul is nearly ready to chat with you, so all the best. Well, fingers crossed for that, my friend. Vince Bicarino, keep up the good work, Dan. I've been listening from the beginning and always look forward to the new ones. Thanks, mate. And David Cracknell, hi to you as well. Thanks to all of you for your support. It's really appreciated. And if you want to get involved, just head to my website, grab a virtual coffee for a shout out next week, or some of my official merchandise. You can also find me on social media as well. Get in touch on Twitter @WellerFanPod or on Instagram and Facebook, Paul Weller Fan Podcast. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.